Okay. So welcome once again to Kabbalah Decoded, where we try and decode some of the very difficult to understand codes of Kabbalah and make them somewhat accessible at least. Okay, that's our motto. All right. Let us now begin with the text. Again, for those of you who would like to follow in the English, you have the English in front of you. I sent a link in the chat, and you can use that English link. I'm going to read in the Hebrew and translate. Basically, what we had learned up until now is that the Baal Shem Tov explained to us that the one of the 10 utterances through which the world was created, according to the Mishnah in Pirkei Av, was the world was created through 10 utterances. And one of the utterances is, there shall be a firmament in the heavens separating between the upper waters and the lower waters, separating between the upper and lower waters. So the Baal Shem Tov speaks about that, and he says that this utterance, the words and the letters, so to speak, of this utterance always stand in the heavens. And in order to enliven, to bring into existence, and to maintain the structure of heavens and earth. He then went on to say, the author of the piece over here, which is Rabbi Shneur Zalman Eliadi, the first Chabad or Lubavitch Rebbe, who's explaining this whole concept. He said that does not only apply to the first of the 10 to that one of the 10 utterances, but to all of the 10 utterances. In other words, all of creation, the way we know it and understand it, came into being through these 10 utterances. What are the 10 utterances? They weren't actually utterances in human terminology. It's only an analogy, called in Hebrew a mashal, an analogy to be able to understand what was actually going on. What we mean is that the world was created through a series of actions, in this case called speech. Why speech? Why is it divine speech? Because speech has an advantage over something like action. For example, one of the examples that he brought, when a potter makes a pot out of clay, once the potter leaves the scene, even leaves the world, even if he passes away, it no longer requires him to exist. However, speech, as long as you're speaking, the words are there. But as soon as you stop speaking, maintain silence, the words disappear, they're not there anymore. Which comes to tell us a very fundamental concept. The analogy of speech comes to tell us a very fundamental concept. We learned about this last week. And that fundamental concept is that all of existence, what we call creation, all of existence, is in a state of constant coming into being. It's being said into existence, being spoken into existence, so to speak, in the analogy. Meaning to say that when the world was created, it wasn't created as a thing. The whole concept of creation is an ongoing activity that has to be maintained from moment to moment. And that's what he says, that therefore all of creation, everything in creation, no matter what it is, not just human beings, not just those things that are mentioned in the 10 utterances, but everything has as its not just life force, but its existential force, the force that brings it into existence, these utterances, which are permutations of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, basically. And he went on to say, and therefore the Arizal, quoting the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, the famous Kabbalist from Safed, who modern Kabbalah is based upon the teachings of the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria. 1500s about. So he says that even in inanimate objects, things that seem to be here as if they were always here, also have a soul, so to speak. In other words, a spark of energy that brings them into existence from moment to moment, which is called the nefesh of the thing, the soul thereof. Now, soul is not an ethereal entity which, sort of wanders around looking like a ghost or whatever it is. No, the soul is simply this level of soul anyway. It's called the life force of existence. It's the level of soul which we call nefesh. Nefesh means the animating principle, the animating force that brings things, that keeps things alive and keeps them in existence all the time. Now, sounds like Star Wars. The truth is, I have never watched Star Wars. Perhaps I should someday. But I believe that what you're referring to is when it says the Force or something like that. I know that there is such a concept in Star Wars. I'm not exactly sure what it means, but the truth is that I have heard from people who have watched Star Wars that it is clear to them, to these people who watched it, that the authors of the Star Wars series must have studied some Kabbalistic concepts. Perhaps they came to it themselves, one doesn't know, but it seems somewhat unlikely that they did. In any event, that is a suspicion that some people have, that they did study some of these fundamental and basic concepts, at least in rudimentary form, and use some of the ideas over there to explain it. But let me go a little bit further. This force that brings things into existence, okay, so Marty's asking a very good question. If the stone is smashed into dust, does it still exist? Is it the same as death for a human, where the body dies but the soul returns to God? Basically what happens is that the life force of that particular permutation, let's say the stone, the permutation of that particular stone, that particular rock that existed before, the permutation is now broken down into more, into smaller constituent parts. Let's put it that way. In other words, the rock is never completely vaporized, right? It simply turns into dust, and the dust maybe recombines and so on and so forth. But it simply turns into smaller constituent parts. That's not quite like the death of a human being. When a human being, yes, there's conservation of energy, exactly, right? In the physical universe, there is a conservation of energy. When a human being passes away and his body disintegrates again into various constituent parts, there's an additional thing which is removed at the time of death, and that's called consciousness, right? That consciousness is part of a higher level of soul. In other words, the physical body of the human being exists not only as a physical object, but as a physical object which has consciousness within it. That consciousness is already a higher level of soul. It's not the only level of soul. There's 5 different levels of soul. But that consciousness you don't really have in a rock or an inanimate object. In plants, there is a certain level of consciousness, even in plants, which is why, as I explained last week, which is why there is a concept mentioned in Kabbalah of, for example, sichas hadekolim, which means the communication of palm trees with one another, right? Inter-tree communication. And I think I mentioned to you last week that there's a video on a TED video which speaks about the communications that there are between trees. The person who says this video, not a very good speaker, as I mentioned, I think last week, but says some very interesting things, about how trees do communicate with each other, and particularly with their offspring, more than with anything else. Trees of the same species speak more than trees of different species, and they talk and they share, they communicate. Let's not use the word talk, that's reserved for human beings, but they communicate in one way or another. They have concern for each other. And that is a feature of consciousness. Animals have a higher level of consciousness, and obviously human beings have a much higher level of consciousness than animals. And within human beings themselves, there are many gradations of consciousness. The highest level of consciousness is total God consciousness, awareness of godliness in everything. That level of consciousness is called Yechida. Yechida, the highest level of the soul. The soul has 5 levels. But we are kind of getting off the subject a little bit, although it's a very useful thing to discuss, and I would like to discuss it. We can talk about it more perhaps in a subsequent class. I would like to finish the chapter today, this particular chapter. So, man or weather may crush a rock and change its apparent form, but both forms and formless are the breath of God. Yes, essentially yes. The rock has no consciousness. How did Moses get in trouble by hitting it? Because he had consciousness. That's why. The whole the problem with Moses hitting the rock was that how shall I say it? He used an extreme form of communication where a sufficient word would have, where a word would have been sufficient. In other words, use an action where a word would have been sufficient. For someone like Moses, that was problematic. It's not necessarily problematic for the average individual, but when it comes to the more lofty the soul, the more that person has to be careful about acting in the proper way. In other words, his actions there had ramifications for the future. That the ramifications were, you've probably noticed this with your own children. Let's just take an example of our own children. If you smack a child when a word would have been sufficient, what are the ramifications of that kind of action? Well, the ramifications are that the child is going to become more rebellious in the future, and you'll need stronger means in the future to be able to deal with what you had to deal with by giving him a smack when a word would have sufficed. Now you're going to have to give him a kick or something like that. Now, God forbid, I'm not suggesting that one should do that, but you can understand in the analogy that that was not the right thing to do, and therefore Moses was punished for it. He was punished for it. Other people say he wasn't actually punished for hitting the rock. He was punished for what he said when he hit the rock. And he called, well, before he hit the rock, he called the people rebellious, right? He called them a rebellious bunch, you rebellious bunch. That's why he got punished. In any event, let's not go there because it's much more, more accountability with the place you've been given. Yes, right. Like police officers have to be more careful about how they deal with criminals and whatever. Suspected perps. Yes. Okay. So to get back on track from our digression upon a digression, although I like digressing, that's the truth, I don't mind. As long as we're learning something and we're learning useful things and what it is that you want to know, I don't mind digressing. It's fine. But in any event, to get back to our subject over here, that the Arizal talks therefore about the words of the 10 utterances and the letters which comprise them. What are these letters that comprise the 10 utterances? These are the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And those are the basic building blocks of all creation. Just like you have DNA in a human being, So too, you have sort of the DNA of existence in all creatures. I don't know if you call it DNA exactly, but whatever we call it, it's obviously not DNA. But this is the Hebrew equivalent of what you would call DNA, I suppose. It's called the Rala Sha'arim. Most basic building block of existence is a two-letter combination of letters called the Rala Sha'arim, the 231 gates. Now, I will explain what the 231 gates are. Just give me a second. Let's see here. All right, I am going to go to a whiteboard so we can explain this a little bit better. All right, here's the whiteboard, folks. I hope you can see it. Everyone seeing the whiteboard? Just mention in the chat if you're seeing the whiteboard. Yes, all right, good. All right, fine. See the whiteboard, that's good. Okay, so in the Hebrew language, there are 22 letters. And the 22 letters are, let me just, okay, here we go. Aleph is one letter, base, Gimel, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin. I don't want to go through the whole alphabet, but that's those are the Hebrew letters, right? Aleph, base, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, etc. Now, each of these letters can combine with other letters. There's this annoying fly that's flying around over here, and it's looking for trouble. All right. Now, what am I going to do here? Let's see. Nope. All right, just let me bring this a little bit closer. You'll see what I'm doing shortly. Okay, what I want to do now is show you what happens, how these permutations work. Etc. All right, so what happens is as follows. The permutations, unfortunately, the way this whiteboard works is not that useful, but what happens with the permutations is as follows. Let me just explain this concept here. The permutations are always minimum two-letter permutations. That's what the Sefer Yetzirah, the Sefer Yetzirah, which we're going to refer to in a minute, calls these two-letter permutations, calls them sha'arim, gates. Why? Because a gate has two posts, right? You can't have a gate with one post, you have two posts. Those two posts are these letters, an aleph and a base, right? Or a beit and a gimel. This is another post. This is another gate. Or a gimel and a dalet. This is another gate, and so on and so forth. Now you can imagine that the letters can go in sequence, in proper sequence, in other words, in the order of the alphabet, A, B, but they can also go B, A, Aleph, Bet, Bet, Aleph, right? So when you have, I'm writing with a mouse, so it's a little, it's probably not going to be so clear, but Bet, Aleph would be the reverse of this, but still similar. Right now, what happens is the maximum amount of combinations of the Hebrew alphabet, since there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, right? There's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. So in order to get the maximum number of combinations, I'm sure we have some mathematicians over here. So in order to get the maximum number of two-letter combinations, how many would we need? How many combinations would we need for this purpose? It would be 22 times 21. Why 22 times 21? The reason for this is because you can't have a combination of Aleph and Aleph, right, of two of the same letters. right? So 22 times 21 equals 462, right? But 462 is the combinations, all the possible combinations. But when you have a combination of Aleph Bet and Bet Aleph, so you can divide those between what's called forward combinations and backward combinations. So you divide that by 2, right? You divide that by 2. So that makes 231. These are called the 231 gates. Or in Hebrew, Rala Sha'arim. Reish Lamed Aleph. Every letter in Hebrew has a numerical value. So the numerical value of Reish is 200. That's 231, right? 231 combinations forward combinations, where the earlier letter in the alphabet comes first and the later letter comes second. And when you reverse it, when the later letter comes first and the earlier letter comes second, that's called Achor. So Panim and Achor. Rala Sha'arim Panim Achor. Right, so that's what the Arizal says when what the Sefer Yetzirah says when it talks about the Rala Sha'arim, the 231 gates. Okay. So these 231 gates, as mentioned in Sefer Yetzirah, 231 forward, 231 reverse combinations. From them comes the basic, these are the basic building blocks, which are then built into larger combinations in 3-letter words and 4-letter words and so on, and then into sentences. And these are the sentences, basically, of the 10 utterances through which the world is created. Therefore, and I think I mentioned this last week, the name of something in Hebrew, the Hebrew name of something, is critical to understanding what its essence is all about. In order to understand the essence of something, one needs to find out its Hebrew name. Now, what if something doesn't have a Hebrew name, is never given a Hebrew name? Like a person doesn't always have a Hebrew name, but the Hebrew name could be, even an English name can be written in Hebrew letters. And in order to be able to fathom like what the permutation that drives this particular person is, one can understand that permutation by finding the consecutive letters in various verses. When I say consecutive letters, let's say the person's name is Moshe, right? My name. Let's say his name is Moshe. So then you find 3 words in a verse, 3 consecutive words in a verse, one which begins with a mem, one which begins with a shin, one which begins with a hey. If it's not found in the initial letters, then you look for it in the final letters of every word. And the first verse, and subsequent verses as well, but particularly the first verse, in which you find the name appearing, is critical for understanding what that particular person's gate is all about, what he is all about, he or she, or it for that matter. In fact, there's a whole discussion in the Talmud, in the Gemara Shabbos, about Moses arguing with the angels. Moses went on high to receive the Torah, to receive the written law, to receive the Torah, the teachings. So the angels argued that everything should be given in the heavens. Amongst the arguments that went on between Moses and the angels was why it is that this world is primary. Why it is that the Torah should be given down in this world. And there's a whole discussion on it. There's another parallel discussion that happens much earlier in the Bible, in biblical exegesis. It's not stated explicitly, but there's another argument between the angels and Adam. Actually, God wanted to know. The angels wanted to know why God was creating man. What are you? What's He creating? What's the advantage of man over anything else, over the angels? So God He proved to them what the advantage of man is. What was the advantage? That the angels were all called together and said, okay, all of these things that I've created, all of the world that I've created prior to the creation of man, what are their names? What are the names of all the creatures? And the angels did not know what the names were. So God had just created Adam, and He said to Adam, what are the names of these creatures? And He said, this is the name of this creature, that's the name of that creature, that's your name, God, etc. And this is the name of man, this is the name of, etc., etc. He gave everything a name. So the name that something is given in Hebrew, the Hebrew name of something, is critical to understanding what it's all about. Now, it could be that many, many different people share the same name. That's obviously true. But nevertheless, there's some common features that are of people who share the same name. There are going to be some common features based on the verses where that name is actually spelled out. Okay, so this is what we've been talking about. Now, what happens if one of the words that we're talking about, one of the words of something, for instance, the name for stone in Hebrew, Even, is not found in the 10 utterances through which the world was created? What happens? So that's what the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe here in Tanya, this Shaar Hayichud vehaEmunah, this gate of faith and of unity and faith, what he explains is as follows. He says that you have what's called tmuros, tzirufim and tmuros. Tmuros means letter exchanges. A letter exchange would be, for instance, there's various rules. I don't want to go into the whole, it's a complicated area. Well, it's not that complicated, but it could be a little bit boring. So I don't want to go into it now, but there's various groups into which the letters fall. And anything within the group can be exchanged with any other group. Like, for instance, there's 3 letters of the alphabet. Oh, actually, let's see here. 1 minute. Yes, actually, I do want to show you this because I think it's very important to... all right, I'm going to stop that share for 1 minute, and I'm going to look for a chart. And here is, yeah, this is the one I'm looking for. Here we go. All right, I will share screen again, and here we go. Okay, here you see a chart of the Sfirot. Here's a chart of the Sfirot. Let me just get my trusty little spotlight. Here we go. A chart of the Sfirot, for those of you who are not so familiar with it, this is a chart of the inner structure of all of the worlds. What are the worlds? The worlds are various planes of reality. The lowest plane of reality is called the world of Asiya, the world of action. Then there's a higher plane of reality called the world of Yetzirah. And the next one up, the world of Bria, then the world of Atzilut, the world of divine emanation. Right? These are all planes of existence and planes of consciousness, higher and higher. Eventually, there's a world which is called Adam Kadmon, the primal meta-creation. Right? The meta-creation. All of these levels of world, all 5 worlds, in other words, all 4 immanent worlds, and then the meta-world of Adam Kadmon, all of them have the same internal structure. That internal structure is the structure of the Sfirot. And the Sfirot are arranged in the world of Tikkun. In any event, the Sfirot are arranged in columns. In the world of Tohu, a prior form of creation, which basically sort of exploded in the Big Bang, so to speak, not the cosmological Big Bang, but the spiritual Big Bang. So that kind of disappeared. That world of Tohu disappeared. Doesn't disappear completely, but the the energy that that enlivened, brought it into existence, was withdrawn, and the vessels of the world of Tohu, the Sfirot, the spheres, the emanations in the world of Tohu, shattered and fell down to a lower level, and then they had to be reconstituted and repaired. I don't want to go into it now because it's off topic. But basically, the 10 Sfirot have between them 22 letters. The Sfirot themselves are not letters. Excuse me. The Sfirot themselves are not letters. But between the Sfirot, the channels between the Sfirot are depicted by the letters. Now, those letters are going in groups. What are the groups? The first group is called the Emesh group. Aleph, Mem, Shin. In other words, the channel between Chesed and Gevura is depicted by the letter Aleph. Right? That channel between these two is the letter Aleph. The channel between Netzach and Hod is a Mem, and the channel between Chochmah and Bina is a Shin. Okay. Those are the parallel, the horizontal channels. Then there's vertical channels. Right? The vertical channels between the Sfirot are called Beged Kefret. Right? Beged Kefret. There's 7 letters which depict these vertical channels. There's the Bet, there's a Gimel, there's a Daled, there's a Chaf, Pei, Reish, Taf, Beged Kefret. Then there are the, what did you call them? Alakson. Not horizontal, not vertical, but what would these be called? I forget what the word is for it. Diagonal. Yes. The diagonal channels. Thank you, Paul. The diagonal channels, yes. So then there's diagonal channels, and that makes up the rest of, there's actually altogether 12 other diagonal, there's 6 other diagonal channels, but having 12 letters altogether. Why? Because these channels are sometimes divided into the channels are divided really into two parts, really. So in any event, they form the rest of the 12 letters are divided into these channels over here, right? So each channel would be a different letter, and they sort of combine as pairs. Let's not go too much into it, but that is basically that is how the Hebrew letters work. Now, what happens when there is some kind of entity which is not mentioned in the 10 utterances? Well, then the same letters, the letters from a certain group can substitute. For instance, when it comes to the word with the letter Aleph, that can be substituted by a Mem or by a Shin, because these are both horizontal channels. Anything on the vertical channels can also, by certain rules, it's not just random or arbitrary, there's rules by which they can be exchanged. And similarly, all the ones on the diagonals can be exchanged in various ways, depending on which way the diagonal goes to a certain extent, if it's that diagonal or if it's that diagonal, right? From bottom to top, from top to bottom. There's all kinds of rules about how it works. I don't want to go into it. It's too complicated. And there's other ways in which it can go as well. Other ways in which the combinations and substitute combinations can work. I'll just give you a brief explanation of a few of them. The first letter of the alphabet, well, it's not going to be so clear. I think let me write it in red. Right, the first letter of the alphabet, which would be an Aleph, right, can exchange with the last letter of the alphabet, which is a Taf, right? So you get what's called at. And then the second letter of the alphabet, bet, can exchange with the second last, right? And then the third letter of the alphabet, obviously, can exchange with the third last letter. And so it goes on. In other words, basically, we divide the alphabet in half, 11 letters above, right? And 11 letters below. And then you can combine them first to last, second to second last, third to third last, and so on and so forth. That's also a method of combination. Then there's other methods of combination as well, where the combination would be, instead of aleph to the last one, the first letter to the last one, the first letter would be combined. The first letter could be combined. In other words, aleph could be combined with a different sequence, with the first one after the break, right? So we get al, and then bet would combine with mem, and so it will go. So there's various rules and various ways in which letters combine, but you can understand that if there are 22 letters which make 462 combinations altogether, and ultimately 231 forward, 231 backwards, then you can combine those into larger combinations of 3 letters and 4 letters, and all those can combine, etc. So you can see that the possible combinations are pretty, I wouldn't say infinite, but there's a lot of them. A lot of them. So, to get back to what we were talking about before then, let's see here. All right, let me go back to where we were. Now I have to clear all the drawings. Okay, there we go. All right, so what we were talking about before, I've just got this on screen, but you can have something else if you can have the English version if you prefer it. So anyway, that's what he calls over here the chilufim and the tmurois, the exchanges of letters, the changes and exchanges of letters. Now, why is this so important? Well, one very important aspect of it in terms of practical Kabbalah, is that if one changes the name of a thing by the proper process of substitution, you can change its nature. Where do we see this used very, very often? When a person is very ill. God forbid, when a person is very ill, one of the ways in which how shall I call it, the muzzle, the destiny, it's not the right word, but one way in which the destiny could be of a person could be changed, or the status of his health or her health could be changed, is by changing the name, by adding a name, either before the name that they were known by, or afterwards. Now it's combining a new name. Combining a new name brings in a new life force into the thing. Similarly, when it comes to a negative situation that a person might find themselves in, some kind of negative situation, if the situation can be reinterpreted as a positive situation, it can be reinterpreted. In other words, you can see the good in it. Then that's also a way of changing the destiny of that particular thing, changing the mode of existence of that particular thing. Someone told me a very interesting story about a person who was involved, I believe was involved in a car accident. Anyway, this person had been studying martial arts for many years, and he was involved in some kind of accident, and he lost an arm. So he went to his master, his judo master, was learning judo, and he said to the judo master, I won't be able to compete anymore in competitions or whatever because of his accident, he lost an arm. So the judo master said, no, you will be able to compete. And he told him to continue with but he would teach him some special moves that he would have to learn. And there was one move in particular that he emphasized all the time, one throw, one particular judo move. I'm not an expert in judo, so I wouldn't really know. But he taught him a certain move over and over and over and again. It was absolutely perfect at that particular move. And again, he was only using one arm. And he went through various competitions, and he was reasonably successful until he came to one competition. It was actually a finalist competition. He was in the finals or something, and he was fighting against a very experienced fighter. And he was only using one arm, and he had to defeat this other fellow using one arm, and the other person had two. What did he do? At one point in time in the fight, although he kept on getting thrown, but and it wasn't looking good for him. At one point in the fight, he managed to use that move that his teacher had taught him, and threw his opponent in such a way that the guy couldn't get up afterwards. He either knocked him out or it was the end of the competition. He won. When he went to his master afterwards, he said, "Why did you teach me that particular move?" Because that's what won me the competition. So the master told him, "When I saw that you only had one arm, I knew that what would cause you to succeed, what would give you success, was the move to which the only counter move is to grab the person's left arm. The only counter move, in other words, the antidote to that, to prevent yourself being thrown, was to grab." And since you don't have a left arm, he had no response to this movement, and therefore you were able to throw him and defeat him. That was what we call a reframing, right? Now, this was a story. It's got nothing to do with Kabbalah and so on and so forth. It's an interesting story that you see how you can take something that appears to be a disadvantage and turn it into an advantage. That's what it means to change the name of something, to change its permutation, to change its status by changing the name of it. Now, the way that the name is changed is, as we said before, it's by exchange of letters, by one of the processes that we mentioned, or one that we didn't mention is by gematria. By gematria is another device that's used in Kabbalah to give a sort of an equivalence between two things. When two things have the same gematria, they are obviously related. They're clearly related. I'll give you an example. I'm sure it's an example that I've given many times before. And one of the word here in Hebrew, if anyone wants to see it, is gematria. Right? Gematria. Gematriot in the plural. What's a gematria? Gematria, let's just read it. The sum of the numerical value of each letter. Each letter has not only a meaning and a pronunciation, but also a numerical value. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, and so on and so forth. So when there's a numerical value to a word, you can exchange it with another word which has the same numerical value. I'll give you an example. One of the examples that I mentioned many times over here is, if you have a look at your hand, you'll see that in your hand, how many sections do you have to your fingers altogether? So in each finger, there's 3 sections, and in the thumb, there's 2. So 3 times 4 is 12, plus 2, 14, right? 14 in Hebrew, if you write out 14 in Hebrew, let me just get my pen here. If you write out 14 in Hebrew, 14, that would be Yud, Dalet. Yad, right? Yad is the Hebrew word for hand. So the numerical equivalent of the word for hand is 14. Why? Because there's 14 sections to the hand, 14 sections to the fingers. Right? Now you have 2 hands. Most people have 2 hands. Not in the story we said before, but most people have 2 hands. 2 hands is multiply 14 by 2. What do you get? You get 28, right? 28 in Hebrew spells the word koach, strength. Where is a person's strength? In his hands, essentially, right? In his hands. The 2 hands together are his koach. That's his strength. Correct? Koach. So these are the kinds of things that you would understand and you would use in order to change the permutation of some particular situation or some particular object, whatever. Great Kabbalists are able to change the permutations of things so that they come out positive rather than negative. And that's what he concludes when he says over here, so each creature, therefore, could be brought into existence through exchanges of the letters in one form or another. And then Nivra Prati, this particular existence is brought about. And that particular permutation is the name that thing is called in Hebrew. Hu kli, it's a vessel, it's a vessel for the energy that is found within this particular permutation of letters. And ultimately it comes from the 10 utterances through which the world was created, that they have the power to create ex nihilo, from nothing, and to enliven, to bring into being constantly. Where does it get this power? Because ultimately the letters and the words of the Torah, where these 10 utterances are found, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, are one thing, right? The Torah is the will and the wisdom of God put down on parchment, and therefore it has the power, these letters have the power to create. They have creative power. Okay, so that is where we're up to. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take some questions. Let me just stop the recording for a minute.